Hi, my name is Harper Walton. I'm originally from Bath and I'm now based in East London in Hackney Wick. And as a writer, I write poetry, stories, novels, memoir, creative nonfiction. Basically, I like to dip my toes into many different pools, and yeah, I just like the variety of different genres. So Midnight Movies came together over the course of several years because it's three separate stories which started a few years ago and have continuously evolved over time through different edits and different feedback. It's nice to have them all together because they're three stories from a couple of years ago now, but they feel brought up to the present and my present writing abilities. Penetralia is about a young woman who moves to Paris for her master's degree in creative writing, and she moves into a very strange dormitory, an illegal dormitory situation called the Territory, which is run by an eccentric landlady called Clotilde. And it's all about art, and it's about obsession and kind of wanting to know what's behind that door that you just can't unlock, and kind of going down deeper into a web of mystery. Then Cornucopia is about six characters, six young people whose lives are intertwined over the course of one night in an anonymous city. How they, keep popping up in each other's lives, how they meet, how they get to know each other. It's an ode to filmmakers like Wong Kar-wai or David Lynch, who capture nighttime and urban environments, the power of synchronicity. And then Deck Chair Cemetery is inspired by my time at Queen Mary University. I would market it as a dark stoner comedy because there's a lot of humor in there of just young people, smoking weed and getting up to all sorts of mischief, but then it has, at its core, it has, quite a dark soul because it's really about someone's deteriorating mental health, but then it's also about someone who wants to write about their life, wants to write about their friends and the ethics of writing about people that you actually know. Yeah, I really hope people enjoy all three stories. So yeah, my first book was a poetry collection, Common Only in Name, published by Porter's Books. For this book, transitioning from poetry to prose, it actually felt very natural because prose was my first love. I started writing stories when I was 18 years old, and poetry I actually came to later. So if someone's just looking at the books that I've published, they might think that I'm, going from poetry to prose, but actually the poetry was just the thing that happened to get published first. Maybe the poetry scene is more accessible, and then prose is something that I think people can be ready for once you've already made a bit of a name for yourself in poetry. Well, for me, I think humor is emotional authenticity, and even on the worst days of my life, I still cracked a joke or two. There's always a balance between light and dark, and that's something that I'm really passionate about in my work, is a mixture of humor and melancholy, and finding the comedy in sadness and in loneliness and in lack of identity. So for Penetralia, it's set in Paris, and I was drawn to that because I was living in Paris at the time, so fairly straightforward. Same with Deck Chair Cemetery because I was living in East London, so naturally that was the setting of the story. But Cornucopia is a bit more interesting because it's set in a fictional anonymous city, and because the story is about non-places, it's about lack of belonging, kind of liminal areas. I really wanted the city to not be applicable to anyone's real life experience. Some people might read the story and try to look up some of the locations on Google Maps, like Rosewood Park football stadium, where's that? But then they'll find that it's not a real place. The whole city is purely fabrication. So I was drawn to this idea of a completely false reality that hopefully the reader could still find themselves in. All three stories are autobiographical in their own way. Deck Chest Cemetery is definitely the most autobiographical because it's heavily inspired by my time at university and at Queen Mary, living in East London, my issues with mental health and, substance abuse. Penetralia is also very autobiographical as well because that was inspired by my time living in Paris for my master's in creative writing. I would say Penetralia does take more liberties with certain genre elements start to impose themselves on the story and really to mirror the nature of the place itself, the territory where the character lives. Then Cornucopia is the least autobiographical story because it's about 6 characters which I have created, but I'm sure each one, if I thought about it, I would recognize bits of myself in each character and also some familiarity with certain plot points as well. I do enjoy planning. So I know some writers absolutely hate it and they just want to go into everything very automatically, very stream of consciousness, and I do like that as well, but for Cornucopia I knew if I was going to pull off 6 interwoven characters over the course of one night, I needed to actually plan it carefully. So I created a grid system where I had the 6 characters on the side and then the different locations that they showed up in over the course of the story. And then I tried to make sure that at least 2 characters appeared in each chapter and they overlapped in at least one location throughout, just to make the story feel more alive and more connected. And I think it's quite rewarding for readers to notice these things of oh, that's that person or that's that person. And yeah, so sometimes planning can be a struggle, but sometimes it can be a pleasure in itself, and when it all comes together it can feel very satisfying as well. So Midnight Movies, I actually chose the title very recently. Originally the collection was just going to be called Deck Chest Cemetery because that was my favorite title of the 3 stories inside. But then I thought, I don't want the title of the book to be one of the stories because that would spotlight it too much. That would make it seem like, oh, that's the main one that I want you to read, when actually I want people to appreciate all 3 equally. Then I just kind of had an epiphany because I was watching this YouTube video about late night movies or midnight movies and how this content creator was having nostalgia for the days when he would just be scrolling through the channels late at night and there'd be a dark comedy or a stoner comedy or a horror movie, and he was just reminiscing about the time where late night programming on TV was such a thing, how the age of streaming has kind of killed that. And then also midnight movies refers to specifically the genre of films that would be shown late night in cinemas, cult classics, B movies, low budget, pulpy, very genre heavy stuff, or more art house things like David Lynch or Wong Kar-wai. For me, all of 3 of these stories really fit into this genre of midnight movies. I know they're not movies, they are stories in a book, but if anyone wants to turn them into movies, then hit me up. But yeah, I just think they fit the vibe of midnight movies, and also I guess the alliteration makes it sound nice as well. I would say working on these 3 stories has allowed me to feel like I can establish myself as a fiction writer, and I'm really happy that this book is coming out to be an example of my prose as opposed to my poetry. And I think I'm in a much better place now moving forward I feel more confident. I feel like I can, I've written 2 novels, I've written a memoir that hopefully will be published one day, and I think Midnight Movies is a really great representation of my fiction as it is now. Yeah, final thoughts about the collection. Firstly, I'm really happy to be working with Femme Social Press. I think they've done a great job so far. I think their books look really great thanks to graphic designer Wendy. Petra and Josh have been great with editing, very communicative. We've also got a launch event which will be on the 15th of June at Theatre Ship in Canary Wharf, which is on a boat. And that's co-organised with Ethereal Maison. So it's going to be a fun night with performances, music, and you'll be able to buy a book there. You can also buy a book on the Femme Social website or through Instagram. I'm also on Instagram, Walton _ if you want to follow updates from me. And yeah, I'm really excited for this book to be out in the world and for people to read it and to talk with people about it.